Imagine prying open the frozen, really heavy wooden hatch of a derelict ship at the absolute bottom of the world.
Right.
You shine a lantern down into this 30-degree below zero gloom, and the air inside is completely dead. It's stale. And you find a crew of men staring right back at you.
Oh, wow.
Perfectly preserved, unblinking, just, trapped in the ice for 17 long years.
And, I mean, the most terrifying part of that scenario isn't even the visceral shock of discovering a frozen time capsule like that.
Yeah.
It's the fact that when you finally flee that ship and you return to civilization and you hand over their logbook, the entire sprawling, meticulous bureaucratic machinery of the British Empire just looks at you and insists there's absolutely no record these men ever existed in the first place.
It's just chilling. Today, you and I are doing a deep dive into the legend of the Jenny.
Yes, we are.
She was this English schooner whose really horrifying fate has captivated and, honestly, terrified readers since the 1840s. Our mission today is to reconstruct this chilling maritime tale. We're going to examine the terrifying real-world environment this allegedly took place in, trace the bizarre paper trail of how this story completely infected the 19th century media, and, explore that incredibly haunting line between historical fact, maritime legend, and pure psychological horror.
Because navigating the treacherous waters of these historical accounts, it requires us to hold two conflicting ideas in our minds at once.
Right.
There is the forensic truth, right? The hard evidence of what we can actually prove through registries and ledgers. And then there's the very real, very visceral terror of what it means to be a human being trapped in the ice.
Exactly.
That the Jenny was a factual vessel whose records were somehow lost, or, a phantom conjured entirely by the Victorian imagination. The dread she represents was a daily looming reality for thousands of sailors who ventured into the dark.
So imagine you were on a wooden ship at the edge of the world in 1822.
Just a terrifying thought right out of the gate.
It really is. There is no radio, no GPS, no distress signal you can fire into the sky that anyone will ever see.
Right. You are completely alone.
The ocean is freezing around you chunk by chunk, and the ice is slowly, methodically closing in like a vice. The sun drops below the horizon, and you realize you are never going home.
Yeah.
That is the atmosphere we are stepping into. So to understand the Jenny, we really have to understand the journey that supposedly brought her to that frozen end.
Right. So according to the surviving accounts, the doomed voyage of the Jenny began in 1822.
Okay.
She departed from her home port on the Isle of Wight, which was, a bustling, sunny maritime hub off the south coast of England.
So pretty standard stuff.
Completely standard. A perfectly normal, highly routine beginning for a 19th century commercial vessel. Her last known port of call was halfway across the world in Callao, near Lima, Peru.
Got it.
And the ship's logbook, which is the absolute heartbeat of any vessel, the official record of its existence, was updated religiously until a final, fateful date, January 17th, 1823.
Oh, wow.
And it's after this date that the Jenny is supposedly swallowed by an ice barrier in the Drake Passage.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the geography of this route is absolutely critical to understanding the psychological descent of this crew.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about the drastic shift in the environment here. You start in the familiar, heavily trafficked waters of the English Channel.
Right, very safe.
You cross the Atlantic, rounding the Americas to reach the Pacific coast of Peru. Callao was a major port. It was warm, it was vibrant, full of supplies, fresh water, life.
Yeah.
But to get back to England or to continue a specific sealing route, you had to go south.
Deep south.
Deep south. You had to sail directly into the Drake Passage. And I feel like we need to really emphasize what that means.
We do, because the Drake Passage is not just another stretch of water. It is infamous for a very good reason.
Yeah.
Geographically, it is the body of water between South America's Cape Horn and the South Shetland Islands of Antarctica. But to understand why it is so deadly, we have to look at the violent meteorological physics at play there. It is literally the only place on Earth where the Atlantic, Pacific, and Southern Oceans collide.
And crucially, there is no significant landmass at that latitude anywhere around the globe to slow the weather down.
Precisely. Because there is no land to break the wind, the prevailing westerlies, which sailors called the furious 50s and the screaming 60s, they whip around the Earth at hurricane forces.
Just constantly building momentum.
Constantly. They drive massive rogue waves that can exceed 80 feet in height.
80 feet? That's just incomprehensible.
It is. And then add to that the Antarctic circumpolar current. This is the largest ocean current in the world, squeezing an unimaginable volume of freezing water through a relatively narrow 500-mile gap.
Wow.
The Coriolis effect, which is driven by the Earth's rotation, forces these waters into a chaotic, churning maelstrom. It is, without exaggeration, the most dangerous, violent sea on the planet.
So it's not just a rough sea, it's a completely alien hostility.
Exactly.
I mean, let's talk about how the ice actually traps a ship, because it doesn't happen the way it does in movies.
Right, it's not the Titanic.
No, it's not a giant iceberg that you crash into and sink in 10 minutes. It's far more insidious. I think of it like a hydraulic press made of water.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like walking slowly into a giant freezer while someone else slowly closes the heavy steel door behind you. Imagine parking your car in a deep, narrow canyon, and the rock walls slowly start growing inward by an inch a day. You can't reverse, and you can't drive forward.
Yeah, the mechanics of sea ice formation are fascinating and deeply terrifying.
Break it down for us.
So it starts when the temperature of the surface water drops below about 28 degrees Fahrenheit or minus 2 degrees Celsius.
Okay.
And it doesn't freeze in a clean, flat sheet like a pond. First, you get frazil ice, which looks like a layer of oily slush on the surface of the water.
It's just floating there.
Yeah, and this actually dampens the waves, making the ocean look bizarrely calm. Then that slush thickens into what's called grease ice.
Grease ice.
Right. Then, because the ocean is still moving beneath it, that grease ice breaks into circular pieces that bump into each other, forming these raised edges. This is what they call pancake ice.
And as those pancakes crash together, they stack up.
Exactly. They stack up and freeze solid into a continuous sheet, and that's when you get pack ice.
God. So for the crew of the Jenny, this wouldn't have been a sudden, chaotic disaster. It would have been a slow, agonizing realization.
A creeping doom.
Right. First, the ship's progress simply slows down. The sails are full of wind, but the slush is just too thick to push through. Then, the ice floes surround the wooden hull.
Yeah.
Finally, the sheer pressure of millions of tons of expanding, freezing ocean locks those oak timbers entirely in place.
And a wooden ship caught in pack ice is an overwhelming sensory experience. The pressure of the ice crushing against the hull is immense.
I can't even imagine the sound.
It's horrific. The ship would groan, shriek, and shudder constantly. The oak timbers bend and pop under the strain.
So you're just sitting there listening to it.
Exactly. Every agonizing sound echoing below decks is a constant reminder that the ocean is systematically trying to crush you like a walnut. You are trapped in a darkness that lasts for months during the Antarctic winter, listening to the very structure keeping you alive slowly failing.
It's pure psychological torture. And let's talk about the timeline here.
Okay.
The legend states the logbook ends on January 17th, 1823.
Right. I have to say, I struggle to believe this part of the narrative. I want to look at this critically.
Fair enough.
If you are freezing to death, the fire in a galley has been dead for weeks, your fingers are turning black with severe frostbite, and your crewmates are dying around you.
Yeah.
You aren't delicately dipping a quill into an inkwell to write coordinates in a book.
You make a good point.
You are burning that book for 3 seconds of warmth. The idea of the captain freezing at his desk with a pen in his hand feels entirely like a Victorian theatrical invention, doesn't it? Why would they keep writing in the logbook until January 17th? Was it duty or a desperate plea to whatever future eyes might find them? Well, the theatricality of the image is undeniable, I'll give you that. But the underlying motivation is deeply rooted in 19th century maritime culture.
How so?
You have to understand what the logbook represented to these men. In the face of utter oblivion, a logbook is the last tether to civilization, to sanity, and to duty. A captain's obligation to his ship, his crew, and his financial backers in London extended beyond his own physical survival. The logbook wasn't just a diary. It was a legal document.
Okay, that makes sense.
Recording the weather, the coordinates, and the state of the crew was a way of establishing order against the absolute chaos of nature. It's a psychological defense mechanism.
Sort of maintaining control when you have none.
Exactly. By writing it down, the captain is essentially saying, we did not just vanish into the void. The void took us on this specific day at this specific coordinate.
So the logbook acts as a final assertion of humanity.
Yes.
But eventually the ink literally freezes. When that pen was put down for the final time on January 17th, the physical realities of hypothermia would have completely taken over.
Right. The body just gives up.
Yeah, as the core body temperature drops, the human body executes this ruthless biological triage. It shunts warm blood away from the extremities, the fingers, the toes, the nose, to protect the vital organs in the core.
which is why frostbite sets in so quickly and brutally.
All right.
Shivering becomes incredibly violent as the muscles try to generate heat through friction. But eventually, the body simply runs out of glycogen.
And then it stops.
The shivering stops. And this is the most dangerous phase, known as profound hypothermia. The brain is deprived of oxygen-rich blood, which leads to severe confusion, hallucinations, and extreme lethargy.
It's terrifying what the brain does in those final moments.
It is. You often hear paradoxical undressing, where freezing victims suddenly feel intensely hot and start ripping off their clothes.
Oh, God.
Or terminal burrowing, which is this primal, almost animalistic instinct to hide in small, enclosed spaces right before death.
So the final moments aboard the Jenny wouldn't have been a chaotic, screaming panic?
No, probably not.
It would have been a slow, silent fading away in the pitch black. A collective drift into unconsciousness surrounded by a freezing hell.
Just absolute silence.
The final log entry marks the exact moment the ship was entirely surrendered to the ice. But this frozen tomb would not remain hidden forever.
No, it wouldn't.
The ice kept them, preserved them, and held on to them for 17 years.
Which brings us to the second act of this incredible narrative.
Yes.
The Drake Passage is remote, it's incredibly hostile. But by the mid-19th century, it was not entirely untraveled.
Right, because of the whaling industry.
Exactly. The whaling and sealing industries were pushing further and further south, driven by a desperate economic demand for whale oil. I mean, this oil literally lit the street lamps of Europe and America.
So there were ships out there.
Yes, which sets the stage for September 1840. 17 brutal years after the years of the deluge. Jenny went silent.
Okay.
Enter a whaling ship named the Hope, commanded by a Captain Brighton. The crew of the Hope were navigating this exact same treacherous stretch of water.
Looking for whales.
Looking for whales, looking for profit. Instead, jutting out of a massive, jagged wall of blue ice, they spot the masts of a ship.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because we have to break down the immense psychological shock experienced by Captain Brighton and his crew here.
It must have been staggering.
Whalers were incredibly practical, hardened men. They dealt in blood, blubber, and the constant threat of death every single day.
Yes.
But seeing an 18th century schooner trapped in a wall of ice, completely silent, its sails rotted away to nothing. It triggers a primal, superstitious dread.
Absolutely. Is it a plague ship? Is it a phantom?
Right. Imagine you are Captain Brighton. You board this ship.
Braver man than me.
Truly. He makes the fateful, incredibly brave decision to board her, and he steps over the threshold from the world of the living directly into a mausoleum.
Yeah.
He pries open the frozen hatch, drops down into the darkness, and he doesn't find skeletons picked clean by birds or time. He finds the crew perfectly preserved. The sources mention them being frozen mid-action, huddled together in despair, staring back with unblinking eyes. You see these preserved bodies staring back at you. How do you even command your own ship after seeing that?
It would break you.
Does a discovery like that curse your own voyage in the minds of your crew?
I mean, it absolutely would have terrified them. But we need to explain the biological mechanism here because it sounds like magic or a curse, but it's hard science.
Let's get into it.
It's the physical reality of the Antarctic environment acting as a terrifying preserver. Antarctica is, technically speaking, a desert.
Right, people forget that.
They do. The humidity is staggeringly low. In an environment with zero moisture in the air and consistent sub-zero temperatures, bodies do not decompose in the traditional sense.
Because decomposition requires bacteria.
Exactly. And bacteria require moisture and warmth to function.
So without bacterial decay, what happens to the flesh?
The bodies undergo a process called sublimation.
Sublimation.
Yeah. This is a physics term where a solid turns directly into a gas without ever passing through a liquid phase.
Oh, wow.
The extremely dry, freezing air essentially sucks the moisture directly out of the cells.
So they're freeze-dried.
Basically, yes. They undergo natural mummification. The skin tightens, it turns pale or leathery. But the facial features, the expressions of terror, the clothing, it all remains incredibly intact.
That is deeply unsettling.
And Captain Brighton stepping into the galley of the Jenny would have been like walking into a wax museum.
Imagine the contrast of that moment. You have the crew of the Hope living, breathing men, their hearts hammering, their breath pluming in the freezing air,
Yeah.
and they are moving cautiously around the silent, statuesque crew of the Jenny.
The tension would be unbearable.
The only sound is the boots of the living crunching on inches of solid rime ice on the decks, just echoing in the dead silence of a tomb that hasn't seen a living soul since 1823.
And the isolation of the Drake Passage heavily amplifies this horror.
Because there's nowhere to run.
Right. There's no authority to report to. You are thousands of miles from civilization, standing in a frozen graveyard.
Yeah.
And yet, amidst this staggering psychological burden, Captain Brighton maintains absolute nautical discipline. He approaches the captain's cabin, locates the frozen logbook, and secures it.
We mentioned earlier that the logbook is a legal document.
We did.
But I mean, why risk your life and the morale of your completely freaked out crew to pry a frozen book from a corpse's hands? Why not just run?
Because of the massive, incredibly complex bureaucracy of maritime salvage and insurance.
Okay.
Without that book, the Jenny is just a nameless derelict. The logbook contains the ship's registry number, the names of the owners, the cargo manifest, and the timeline of the disaster.
Ah, so it's proof.
Exactly. If Brighton returns to London with that book, he can legally claim salvage rights. He can provide closure to the insurance underwriters at Lloyd's of London who have kept the Jenny on their missing ledgers for 17 years.
It's all about the money.
It usually is. The logbook is the only way to translate a horrific, spectral nightmare back into the rigid legal reality of the 19th century British economy.
So Brighton takes the logbook. He leaves the Jenny to her icy fate, probably desperate to get his own ship away from that cursed latitude.
Undoubtedly.
He returns to civilization. But he doesn't just return with a book to hand to a clerk. He returns with a story.
I want a story.
And once that story hits land, it spreads with a speed and ferocity that completely defies the era.
This is where the incident transforms from a localized, horrifying encounter into a full-blown international media phenomenon.
Let's trace this paper trail because it is bizarre. Fast forward to early 1841.
Okay.
The earliest known printed source for this chilling tale is not an English maritime gazette in London.
No, it isn't.
It's an article in the Wiener Zeitung, which is a newspaper in Vienna, Austria, published on February 19, 1841.
Which is wild.
It is. Vienna is landlocked. It's the heart of the Austrian Empire, thousands of miles away from the Isle of Wight, Peru, and Antarctica. How does a maritime ghost story break to the public in landlocked Austria?
To understand this, you really have to look at the mechanics of 19th century newspaper syndication.
Okay.
There were no wire services like the Associated Press in the 1840s. Information moved entirely through physical space.
Very slowly.
Exactly. So a ship arrives in a major port, like Hamburg or Amsterdam. The captain goes to a tavern or the harbor master's office and tells his incredible story.
Someone overhears it.
Right. A local journalist or a sharp-eared merchant writes it down and publishes it in a small port town broadsheet.
And from there, it enters the postal network.
Yes. Newspapers across Europe had reciprocal subscriptions with one another. Mail carriages and early railway networks would carry stacks of newspapers across borders.
I see.
So an editor at the Wiener Zeitung in Vienna receives a bundle of foreign papers, scans them for the most sensational, attention-grabbing stories to fill his columns, translates the English or Dutch account into German, and prints it as fact.
Wow.
It was an era of rampant, completely unregulated syndication. Fact-checking a story from the Antarctic was literally impossible.
The logistics of this virality are staggering. I mean, this was essentially a 19th century creepypasta.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
It went viral before going viral was even a thing. Within literally weeks of that February 19th publication in Vienna, the exact same text was printed in at least 7 other European newspapers.
It just exploded.
It did. And the names of these papers map a panic spreading across the continent. On March 1st, it hits the Der Boot von Tyrol.
Right.
On March 2nd, the Wiener Zeitung. Then it explodes into the Brunner Zeitung, the Der Siebenburger Bote, the Didaskalia, the Österreichischer Beobachter, and the Gemeinnützige Blätter.
It's everywhere.
Everywhere. Throughout March and April 1841, readers in coffee houses across Europe are just flooded with the story of the frozen ghost ship. But why? Was it just morbid curiosity or a deeper primal fear of the cold?
We have to ask why this specific story triggered such a massive chain reaction. And I think it's about the deep psychological anxieties of the era.
What was going on at the time?
Well, the 1840s were the absolute height of the Industrial Revolution. Railways were carving through mountains, Steamships were defying the wind.
Telegraph wires were going up.
Exactly. The world was feeling increasingly tame, engineered, and entirely controlled by human hands.
So they secretly craved a story that proved the exact opposite.
Precisely. They suffered from this collective anxiety about human hubris. The Ginny perfectly encapsulated the worst-case scenario of human ambition versus nature.
Right.
It fed into the 19th century obsession with the sublime, which is the aesthetic experience of being overwhelmed by something vast, powerful, and utterly terrifying, but, observing it from a safe distance.
Like watching a horror movie today.
Very much so. Sitting in a warm, gaslit coffeehouse in Vienna and reading about a ship of frozen corpses at the edge of the world delivered this profound, thrilling shiver that validated their deepest fears about the unconquerable frontiers of the Earth.
It's the anatomy of a viral hit. The hoax succeeds because it validates society's deepest anxieties.
Yeah.
And the wild thing is, it didn't just fade away after 1841. The story goes dormant, sure, but it resurfaces decades later.
It refuses to die.
In 1862, a popular German geographical magazine called Globus republishes the entire legend.
Right.
Why 1862? What was happening in the world that made the Jenny relevant again?
Oh, the context of 1862 is incredibly vital here. During this period, the entire Western world was completely gripped by the terrifying reality of the Franklin expedition.
Oh, of course. Sir John Franklin.
Yes. He had taken two state-of-the-art British ships, the Erebus and the Terror, into the Canadian Arctic to find the Northwest Passage.
And they just vanished.
Vanished completely.
Mm.
By the 1850s and 60s, rescue expeditions, like the really famous McClintock expedition, were returning to England with horrific evidence.
Evidence of what happened to them.
Yeah. Evidence of the crew starving, freezing, and even resorting to cannibalism while trapped in the ice.
So real-world trauma basically resurrected the myth of the Jenny.
Absolutely. The public terror regarding ships trapped in the ice had been entirely reawakened. The editors of Globus knew that their readers were already primed to be terrified by icebound ships.
So they fed them the ultimate distillation of that fear.
Exactly. The perfectly preserved crew of the Jenny. And the story was treated as absolute, unquestionable historical fact. The headline in the Wiener Zeitung literally translated to a true event.
Wow.
The newspapers presented it without a shred of doubt. But this is where our narrative has to shift.
Right.
We move from a terrifying recounting of an event to a fascinating, completely ruthless, forensic historical investigation.
Because as modern researchers look back, digging into the archives, trying to find the actual logs, the insurance records, the harbor master receipts, the ice began to crack on the facts.
It really did.
Today, among maritime historians, the Jenny is widely considered an unproven legend, most likely a brilliant 19th century hoax.
And crucially, we have to look at the definitive work of Robert K. Headland on this.
Who is he?
He's a prominent polar historian. In his 1989 book, Chronological List of Antarctic Expeditions and Related Historical Events, Headland is brutally clinical in his assessment of the Jenny.
What does he say?
He explicitly states, there is no corroborative evidence for this event.
Okay, let's delve into what no corroborative evidence actually means in the context of 19th century Britain, because it's not just a matter of, oh, they lost a piece of paper.
No, not at all.
The British maritime industry in the 1820s was the most intensely bureaucratic machine on the planet.
Exactly. To understand how a historian like Headland dismantles this myth, you have to understand the bedrock of British shipping, Lloyd's of London, and the Registry of Shipping. Right. If a schooner named the Jenny was actually built, bought, and launched from the Isle of Wight, she would have a registry number. She would have a recorded tonnage.
There's a paper trail for everything.
Everything. There would be customs records detailing her cargo, and most importantly, there would be an insurance policy.
Because ship owners were businessmen.
They were businessmen. They did not send expensive wooden ships across the globe without heavy insurance.
And when a ship doesn't come back, the owners don't just shrug and forget about it.
Definitely not.
They file a massive claim.
They file a claim, the underwriters investigate, and the ship is officially posted as missing at Lloyd's. There are voluminous ledgers tracking every single lost vessel.
And what about Captain Brighton?
Well, furthermore, if Captain Brighton returned in 1840 with a recovered logbook, it would trigger a formal Admiralty inquiry.
Of course it would.
The logbook would be deposited with the ship's owners or the naval courts. The story would appear in official British naval gazettes and legal proceedings long before it ever reached a coffeehouse translator in Austria.
But Headland and other archivists scoured the Lloyd's registers.
They did.
They checked the customs records for the Isle of Wight. They looked for the whaling ship Hope and Captain Brighton.
And they found absolutely nothing.
Nothing at all.
No ship registry, no trace of the owners, no insurance claims, and no physical logbook ever produced. The entire vast, paper-obsessed bureaucracy of the British Empire contains a complete void where the Jenny should be.
Which leads us to the inevitable conclusion that the story just materialized out of thin air as a piece of sensational fiction.
It appears that way, yes.
So what does this all mean? Because this is where I hit a wall. If it's a hoax, someone had to sit down and invent it.
Right.
Who comes up with the hyper-specific detail of the logbook ending on January 17th, 1823? If you are making up a ghost story, why not just say they froze in the deep winter?
Good question.
The specificity of January 17th is what makes it so utterly terrifying. It feels too real, too mundane to be fake.
You've just identified the exact mechanism of a successful 19th century literary hoax.
Really?
Yes. Writers of this era, Edgar Allan Poe being the most famous example, with his novel The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, they understood something crucial.
What's that?
To sell a piece of fiction as journalism, you had to armor it with bureaucratic specificity.
Ah, I see.
You don't use vague, spooky language. You use dates, coordinates, and proper nouns. You invent a Captain Brighton and a specific date like January 17, 1823, because those mundane details bypass the reader's skeptical filters.
It reads exactly like the cold, hard fact a traumatized captain would formally report to an admiralty board.
Exactly.
So a clever journalist in 1841 essentially invented the found footage genre of horror, but for newspapers. They used the aesthetics of a legal document to Trojan horse a nightmare into the public consciousness.
That is a perfect way to describe it. But I would argue that recognizing it as a hoax doesn't diminish the horror.
No.
No, it enhances our understanding of it. The reason the hoax works so perfectly, the reason it infected the minds of millions of readers, is because the premise is entirely scientifically and historically plausible.
Because ships did go missing.
Ships did go missing in the Drake Passage constantly. Ice does crush hulls. Sublimation does perfectly preserve bodies in the Antarctic tri-valleys.
So the fear was real.
Very real. The Jenny might be a phantom of ink and paper, but the threat she represents was a daily, deadly reality for 19th century sailors.
It's the stark contrast that makes the story so enduring. On one hand, you have the hard, cold reality of Headland's 1989 academic ledger, which coldly dismisses the event in a single, sterile sentence.
No corroborative evidence.
Exactly. But on the other hand, you have the fiery, terrified imaginations of the 1841 journalists who reported it as absolute, God-fearing truth.
Yeah.
The Jenny may have been erased from the official logs of history, but she completely refused to stay buried. The historians couldn't hold her. She sailed on straight into the realm of art, literature, and incredibly actual physical geography.
The endurance of the legend is perhaps the most profound part of the entire investigation.
Yeah.
It left physical and cultural marks on the world that outlasted the original newspaper clippings by over a century.
Let's talk about the map. Because geographically, the Jenny is commemorated today in the actual Antarctic landscape.
It really is.
There's a towering feature of ice and rock on King George Island near Melville Peak, officially designated as the Jenny Buttress.
And this wasn't named by some local tour guide trying to sell tickets to tourists.
No, not at all.
It was named by the UK Antarctic Place Names Committee in 1960.
The profound irony of that decision is just staggering.
Isn't it?
You have a highly official, rigorous governmental scientific body, literally, cartographers and geologists dedicated to mapping literal truth-naming a real physical buttress of ancient rock after a ship that their own maritime historians agree never existed.
It's amazing.
By doing so, they anchored a phantom ship forever into the actual physical geography of the Antarctic.
It shows a deep, almost subconscious respect for maritime folklore. The scientists mapped the reality, but they allowed the myth to claim the territory.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
And it didn't just conquer the map. It conquered culture. Decades later, in 1948, the renowned Australian poet Rosemary Dobson wrote a poem titled The Ship of Ice.
And it won an award.
Yes. It won the prestigious Sydney Morning Herald Award.
Dobson based her poem on an anonymous historical report called The Drift of the Jenny, 1823-1840. But as an artist, she took creative liberties with the timeline.
She did.
She placed the discovery of the ship in 1860, essentially adding 20 more years to the crew's entrapment in the ice.
Which is a huge change.
Why do you think she intentionally extended the timeline? I mean, the original hoax had them trapped for 17 years, which is horrifying enough.
Yeah.
Dobson stretches it to 37 years. Why alter the source material to extend the suffering?
You have to look at the context of 1948. The world had just emerged from the incomprehensible trauma and mass death of the Second World War.
Oh, of course.
Millions of people were grappling with immense loss, memory, and just the ghosts of the past. By stretching the timeline to 37 years, Dobson amplifies the emotional weight of the story.
It changes the meaning.
Exactly. 17 years is a tragic maritime accident. 37 years becomes a profound meditation on eternity.
She elevates the time capsule motif from a simple horror story into a beautiful, melancholy exploration of permanence. She uses this terrifying imagery, describing the Jenny as a ship caught in a bottle.
That's such a striking image.
But the most haunting line is when she says the ship is becalmed in time and sealed with a cork of ice.
Sealed with a cork of ice. It's brilliant. In Dobson's hands, the brutal reality of the Drake Passage and the physical fear of hypothermia transfers into art.
Right.
The Jenny is no longer just a story about freezing to death. It becomes a metaphor for anyone feeling becalmed in time, stuck.
Unable to move forward or backward.
Exactly. Perfectly preserved in their trauma,
Yeah.
waiting to be found by a world that has just moved on without them.
You know, the fact that an entire geographical feature is named after a ghost ship and that award-winning poetry is written about it a century later, it proves something fundamental about human nature. It proves that sometimes the legend is vastly more necessary than the truth. We use stories to process the things that terrify us the most.
We absolutely do.
The ocean is vast, dark, and utterly indifferent to human life. The Jenny gives a face, a name, and a narrative to that terrifying indifference. It's almost as if we want the Jenny to be out there.
We need the ocean to have these dark, mythical corners where logic fails and the impossible happens because it allows us to project our own anxieties onto an environment we cannot control.
That makes total sense.
The Jenny forces us to confront our ultimate vulnerability. When faced with the absolute crushing power of nature, all of our human engineering, our meticulous logbooks, and our ambitious commerce are incredibly fragile.
What a harrowing journey we've navigated today.
It really has been.
We started with the fateful routine departure of the Jenny from the sunny Isle of Wight in 1822. We followed her down into the crushing, shrieking darkness of the Drake Passage, dissecting the violent physics of the ice that closed around her hull until January 17, 1823. We felt the horrifying, visceral shock of Captain Brighton in 1840, stepping into a frozen mausoleum governed by the biology of sublimation.
A literal house of horrors.
We traced how that terror physically traveled by mail carriage and clipper ship to infect the coffeehouses of Europe through a viral newspaper panic in 1841.
Right.
And we watched modern historians tear the bureaucratic facts apart, only to see the legend rise from the ashes, claiming its own icy buttress on the map and haunting poetry in the modern era.
It is a perfect encapsulation of how history, science, and folklore constantly collide.
Oh.
We search for facts, but we are ultimately captured by the story.
So true. I want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over. Think about the sheer, incomprehensible scale of the Antarctic ice shelves right now.
Okay.
They're ancient, massive, and largely completely unexplored beneath the surface. And right now, as global temperatures continuously shift, massive chunks of that ice, some the size of small cities, are breaking away, calving into the ocean, and melting.
It's happening every day.
If the hoax of the Jenny was based on a terrifying scientific plausibility, if there really are lost ships out there, real ones, completely forgotten by history, erased from the ledgers, trapped in the ice centuries ago, their crews waiting perfectly preserved in the dark, what exactly is the ice getting ready to reveal to us next?